There is a quiet danger that comes with awareness. Not the kind of awareness that helps you pass exams or win arguments, but the kind that allows you to see patterns beneath behavior, contradictions beneath smiles, fear beneath confidence, motives beneath words. Most people move through life reacting to surfaces, but a few see beneath them. And here is the truth no one tells you. Seeing what others don't is not just a gift, it is a burden. It can isolate you. It can exhaust you. It can even make you question your own sanity. Because when you see what others refuse to see, you become responsible for a truth they may not be ready to face. Today, we are going to talk about the danger of seeing what others don't, and why this ability can either make you powerful or quietly destroy you. Let's begin. Awareness does not arrive with applause. It arrives quietly, almost invisibly, and then one day you realize you no longer fit where you used to belong. The first danger of deep perception is isolation. At first, it feels subtle. You begin to notice small inconsistencies in conversations, the forced laughter, the strategic compliments, the insecurity hiding behind confidence. You sense when someone agrees not because they believe it, but because they fear rejection. You see the unspoken tension in rooms that everyone pretends is not there. And without trying to be different, you become different. You laugh less at shallow jokes because they no longer entertain you. You question popular opinions because you can see how easily they are shaped by fear or trend. You start feeling uncomfortable in environments that once felt normal, not because you are superior, but because you are aware. Awareness disrupts comfort, and slowly, without announcing your departure, you drift. You drift from conversations that revolve around gossip. You drift from friendships built on distraction. You drift from spaces where conformity is rewarded and curiosity is punished. This drifting can feel like loss. You may wonder if something is wrong with you. Why can't you just relax? Why can't you just go along with it? Why does your mind keep searching beneath the surface? But history reminds us that this experience is not new. It is ancient. There have always been individuals who saw too clearly for their time. Scientists who questioned accepted medical practices were mocked before they were honored. Innovators were dismissed before they were celebrated. Social psychology experiments, like the famous conformity studies where participants denied obvious visual truth just to match the group, revealed something unsettling. Most people would rather belong than be right. Imagine being the one person in the room who refuses to deny what your eyes can clearly see. Imagine saying, "No, the line is longer," while everyone else insists it is shorter, simply because they do not want to stand out. That moment, that quiet resistance, is the birthplace of isolation. Seeing clearly often means standing alone, and loneliness becomes the first price of awareness. It is not dramatic loneliness. It is subtle. It is sitting in a group yet feeling separate. It is speaking carefully because you know your observations might make others uncomfortable. It is sensing that your depth intimidates those who prefer simplicity. But here is the deeper truth: isolation is not punishment. It is preparation. When external validation begins to fade, you are forced to build something internal. You can no longer rely on applause, agreement, or belonging to reassure you. You must learn to trust your own perception, and that is terrifying, because trusting your own perception means you can no longer hide behind consensus. You can no longer say, "Well, everyone else thinks this way." You stand on your own judgment. This is where many retreat. They shrink their insight to fit back in. They laugh at jokes they don't find funny. They silence questions they feel rising in their chest. They trade clarity for comfort. But if you endure the discomfort, something powerful begins to form. You develop inner stability. You stop needing every room to approve of you. You stop chasing belonging at the cost of integrity. You begin to understand that being misunderstood is sometimes the natural consequence of seeing differently. And slowly, the loneliness transforms. It stops feeling like rejection and starts feeling like refinement. You begin to attract fewer people, but deeper ones. Conversations shift from surface, level distractions to meaningful exchanges. You find that one person who also sees beneath appearances, and the connection feels electric because it is honest. Awareness separates you before it elevates you because elevation requires independence. If you were still dependent on the crowd for identity, you would never dare to see differently. You would suppress insight to protect belonging. Isolation forces you to ask a crucial question. Who are you when no one agrees with you? Are you still confident in your perception? Are you still grounded in your truth? Or do you collapse the moment approval disappears? This is the psychological initiation of awareness. It strips away your addiction to acceptance. It confronts your fear of standing alone. It exposes how much of your identity was built on blending in, and as painful as that realization can be, it is also liberating. Because once you survive being different, you no longer fear it. You realize that loneliness is not a sign you are broken. Sometimes it is evidence that you are thinking for yourself, that you are observing instead of blindly absorbing, that you are conscious in a world that often prefers autopilot. Awareness is dangerous because it removes you from the comfort of collective sleep. But it is also sacred. It demands courage before it offers clarity. It demands solitude before it offers strength. And if you endure that first season of separation, if you resist the urge to shrink yourself for approval, you will discover something extraordinary. The very awareness that once made you feel alone will become the foundation of your power. Not loud power, not aggressive power, but quiet, unshakable power. The kind that does not need everyone to agree. The kind that does not panic when misunderstood. The kind that can stand in a room full of denial and still see clearly. When perception deepens, the world loses its simple categories. People are no longer purely heroes or villains in your story. They become complex, layered, contradictory. The friend who appears generous may secretly crave recognition. The confident colleague may be driven by an unspoken fear of inadequacy. The person who lashes out in anger may be protecting a wound they have never learned to name. You begin to see envy hidden in kindness. You see fear hidden in anger. You see weakness hidden in arrogance. And at first, this clarity feels empowering. It feels like you've unlocked a secret code behind human behavior. You are no longer fooled by appearances. You recognize that most reactions are not random. They are compensations. Overconfidence often masks doubt. Control often masks anxiety. Excessive niceness often masks a need to be liked. But then something unsettling happens. The same lens you use to observe others slowly turns inward. And now the insights are no longer comfortable. You begin to notice that your generosity sometimes carries an expectation. That your frustration sometimes hides insecurity. That your ambition sometimes masks a fear of being insignificant. You catch yourself wanting approval while claiming independence. You see how your moral judgments occasionally disguise your own unacknowledged impulses. This is where many people retreat, because it is far easier to dissect the flaws of others than to confront the contradictions within yourself. It is easier to say, "They are arrogant," than to admit, "I feel threatened." It is easier to label someone as jealous than to ask whether you have ever envied someone's success in silence. Real awareness does not inflate the ego, it dismantles it. The ego prefers the illusion of moral superiority. It wants to believe you are more conscious, more evolved, more disciplined than the people around you. But true psychological growth does not make you feel superior. It makes you feel honest, and honesty can sting. There is a reason why self-awareness is rare. Research in organizational psychology consistently shows that people overestimate their own self-awareness. In leadership studies, those with the highest confidence in their objectivity are often the least aware of their blind spots. Leaders who fall from grace rarely lack intelligence. They lack insight into their own shadow, the unexamined desires for power, validation, control. Blind spots are not about ignorance. They are about avoidance. And when your perception sharpens, avoidance becomes harder. You start noticing the subtle ways you defend your identity, how quickly you justify your mistakes, How easily you reinterpret events to protect your pride. You see how your need to be right sometimes outweighs your desire to understand. Seeing this is dangerous, because once you recognize your shadow, you can no longer blame the world for everything. You can no longer pretend that all conflict originates outside of you. You are forced to admit that some of your suffering is self-created, driven by fear, insecurity, or unresolved wounds. It removes your excuses, and that can feel like standing naked in front of your own conscience. But here is the paradox: this discomfort is not destruction. It is integration. When you acknowledge your envy, it loses its hidden control over you. When you admit your insecurity, it becomes workable rather than shameful. When you recognize your desire for approval, you can begin to untangle it instead of unconsciously chasing it. The shadow does not disappear by denial. It strengthens. It whispers through passive aggression. It leaks through sarcasm. It surfaces in resentment. It distorts relationships. It sabotages success. But when you face it directly, something shifts. You stop pretending to be perfect and start becoming whole. Wholeness is not about eliminating darkness. It is about integrating it. It is about understanding that the same intensity that fuels your ambition can also create impatience. The same sensitivity that makes you empathetic can also make you defensive. The same drive for excellence can turn into harsh self-criticism if left unchecked. When you accept these dualities, you become less reactive. You no longer need to project your flaws onto others to protect your self-image. You can admit, yes, I felt jealous. Yes, I acted from fear. Yes, I wanted validation. And strangely, this admission does not weaken you. It stabilizes you. Because self-awareness creates choice. If you are unaware of your insecurity, it controls your decisions. If you are unaware of your need for dominance, it shapes your relationships. But if you can see it clearly, you can pause before acting on it. You can decide whether to let it speak or remain silent. This is the transformation that separates surface awareness from deep awareness. Surface awareness observes others. Deep awareness includes the self. It takes courage to see the shadow in others. It takes even greater courage to see it in yourself. But that courage births integrity. It aligns your inner world with your outer behavior. And when you reach that point, you stop fighting an internal war. You are no longer divided between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. You become grounded, authentic, calm. The danger of seeing your own darkness is that you can never again claim innocence in ignorance. But the gift is immeasurable, because once you integrate your shadow, it no longer controls you from behind the curtain. You stop performing goodness. You start embodying truth. And that is where real psychological strength begins. When you begin to articulate uncomfortable truths, something strange happens. The resistance you face is rarely intellectual. People do not always counter your logic with stronger logic. They do not calmly present evidence to disprove you. Instead, they react. They call you negative. They say you overthink. They label you too intense, too dramatic, too sensitive. And if you are not careful, you will start to wonder whether they are right. But look deeper. When you disrupt an illusion that someone depends on, you are not just challenging an idea. You are threatening a psychological defense. Illusions are not random. They are protective structures. They keep people from confronting fears they are not ready to face. They preserve identity. They reduce anxiety. They create a sense of stability in an unstable world. So when you point to something beneath the surface, corruption in a system, dishonesty in a relationship, denial in a family dynamic, the reaction you receive is not always about the truth itself. It is about what that truth would require if acknowledged. If they accepted what you are saying, they might have to change. They might have to admit they were wrong. They might have to confront their own complicity. They might have to feel grief, guilt, or fear, and the mind defends against that pain instinctively. Psychology calls this projection, attributing one's own discomfort to someone else. Instead of saying, "I feel threatened by this truth," a person says, "You are being dramatic." Instead of admitting, "This makes me anxious," They say, "You're too negative." Instead of acknowledging, "I'm not ready to face this," they insist, "You're imagining problems." In that moment, you become the container for their unease. You become the problem, not because you are wrong, but because you are early. History is full of examples. Visionaries who warned about financial collapses before they happened were mocked as alarmists. Reformers who exposed injustice were labeled troublemakers. Whistleblowers who revealed corruption were attacked more fiercely than the corruption itself. At first, they were inconvenient. Only later were they understood. But during that in-between stage, the stage where you see clearly and others do not, the emotional pressure can be intense. You may begin to doubt yourself. You may soften your language. You may shrink your perception to preserve relationships. You may tell yourself, "Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe I should just let it go." And sometimes letting go is wise. But sometimes shrinking yourself is self-betrayal. If you are someone who sees what others overlook, you must develop emotional discipline. Without it, the projections of others will destabilize you. You will start carrying emotions that are not yours. You will feel guilt for naming patterns that were already present. You will internalize labels that were never accurate. Emotional discipline does not mean becoming cold. It means becoming grounded. It means recognizing when someone's reaction belongs to them, not to you. It means asking quietly, "Is this criticism about my behavior or about their discomfort?" There is a difference. And discernment is everything. But wisdom requires something even more subtle. Not every truth needs to be spoken immediately. Not every insight needs an audience. Just because you see something does not mean it must be declared. Timing matters. Context matters. Psychological readiness matters. If you speak a truth into a space that cannot receive it, you are not necessarily brave. You may simply be premature. Truth delivered without sensitivity can feel like attack, even if it is accurate. And sometimes silence is not cowardice, but strategy. Wisdom is not just seeing. It is knowing when to reveal what you see. There are moments when speaking is necessary, when silence would make you complicit. And there are moments when restraint is powerful, when observing quietly allows reality to unfold without resistance. Emotional maturity lies in knowing the difference. If you lack discipline, you may feel compelled to correct every illusion, challenge every denial, expose every inconsistency. But this can turn clarity into compulsion. You begin fighting battles that drain you. You exhaust yourself trying to awaken those who are committed to sleep, and slowly, resentment grows. But when you cultivate inner stability, something shifts. You no longer need immediate validation for what you perceive. You do not require everyone to agree with you. You trust your clarity without demanding applause. You become patient. You understand that awareness unfolds in stages, that people confront truths when they are ready, not when you insist. And when projections come, when someone calls you too intense, too analytical, too serious, you pause instead of reacting. You evaluate instead of absorbing. You ask yourself whether there is constructive feedback hidden in their words. If there is, you refine yourself. If there isn't, you release it. Because not every accusation deserves residence in your mind. The danger of being perceptive is not that others will resist you. That is inevitable. The real danger is that you will internalize their resistance and begin doubting your own perception. Clarity without confidence collapses under pressure, but clarity grounded in emotional discipline becomes unshakable. You learn to carry uncomfortable truths without weaponizing them. You learn to speak when it matters and stay silent when it serves growth. You learn that being early often feels like being wrong, until time reveals otherwise. And when you reach that level of steadiness, something profound happens. You stop fighting projections. You stop arguing with denial. You stop needing to be understood immediately. You simply remain clear. And that quiet clarity, sustained over time, becomes more powerful than any emotional reaction ever could be. There is another danger that rarely gets discussed. When your perception becomes sharp, when you can read tone shifts, micro expressions, subtle pauses in conversation, hidden meanings behind polite words. Your mind does not always know when to turn off. You begin analyzing everything. A delayed reply becomes a signal. A slight change in energy becomes a warning. A neutral comment becomes layered with possible subtext. At first, this feels like strength. You feel prepared. You feel ahead. You feel like you can anticipate outcomes before they unfold. But slowly, without noticing, your nervous system starts paying the price. Hyper-awareness turns into hyper-vigilance. Instead of clarity, you experience suspicion. Instead of intuition, you experience anxiety. You replay conversations in your head. You dissect sentences. You search for inconsistencies. You scan rooms unconsciously. Your body remains slightly tense, even in safe environments. And the tragedy is this: what once protected you now begins to exhaust you. For many people, this pattern did not begin in adulthood. It began in childhood. If you grew up in an unpredictable environment, where moods shifted quickly, where conflict erupted without warning, where safety depended on reading the emotional climate, you learned to scan for subtle cues as a survival strategy. You learned to read the room before speaking. You learned to detect tension before it exploded. You learned to anticipate disappointment before it arrived. This skill kept you safe. But survival strategies do not automatically deactivate when the danger disappears. The nervous system remembers. It continues scanning even when you are no longer in threat. And so what was once adaptive becomes excessive. You start assuming meaning where there may be none. You interpret ambiguity as danger. You mistake neutral silence for rejection. You become so skilled at detecting patterns that you begin seeing patterns everywhere, even where none exist. This is the thin line between wisdom and paranoia. Wisdom observes patterns but remains calm. It notices without panicking. It gathers evidence before drawing conclusions. It understands context. It accepts uncertainty. Paranoia assumes threat without sufficient evidence. It fills gaps with fear. It jumps from possibility to certainty. It reacts before verifying. The difference is not intelligence. It is grounding. Grounding anchors perception in reality instead of imagination. It allows you to ask, is this an observable fact, or is this my fear speaking? It slows the leap from interpretation to conclusion. Without grounding, perception becomes distorted by unprocessed emotion. If you see deeply, you must also learn to rest deeply. This is not weakness. It is discipline. You cannot live in constant analysis. The human nervous system was not designed for perpetual scanning. Research on stress physiology shows that chronic hyper-vigilance keeps the body in a low-level fight or flight state. Over time, this leads to fatigue, irritability, burnout, and even physical symptoms. Awareness without regulation leads to exhaustion, but awareness with regulation leads to mastery. Meditation research consistently shows that individuals who practice mindful awareness develop stronger emotional regulation and lower stress responses. They still perceive deeply, but they are not hijacked by what they perceive. Their heart rate stabilizes faster after stress. Their thoughts become less reactive. Their interpretation of events becomes more balanced. They see, but they do not spiral. The goal is not to blunt your perception. It is to stabilize it. You must train yourself to differentiate between intuition and anxiety. Intuition feels quiet and grounded. It presents insight without urgency. Anxiety feels loud and pressing. It demands immediate reaction. It insists that something is wrong, even when evidence is unclear. Learning this distinction requires patience. It may require therapy. It may require meditation. It may require journaling your interpretations and checking them against reality. It may require consciously reminding yourself, not every pause means rejection. Not every silence means betrayal. Because if you do not consciously retrain your nervous system, your gift will become a prison. You will isolate yourself not because others reject you, but because you distrust them. You will sabotage connections not because they are dangerous, but because you anticipate danger before it exists. You will live in a state of guarded alertness, unable to fully relax. And relaxation is not indulgence. It is restoration. When you learn to rest deeply, something shifts. Your perception becomes clearer, not cloudier. You stop projecting past threats onto present moments. You respond instead of react. You evaluate instead of assume. Your mind becomes sharp but calm, alert but steady. This is the integration of awareness and regulation. You can read a room without absorbing its anxiety. You can sense tension without internalizing it. You can notice inconsistencies without constructing catastrophic stories around them. You remain centered. And from that center, perception becomes precise rather than paranoid. The danger of over-perception is not that you see too much. It is that you feel too much without regulation. It is that your nervous system mistakes every ambiguity for threat. But when you cultivate grounding through breath, through mindfulness, through conscious reframing, you reclaim control over your awareness. You stop living in defense mode. You start living in discernment. And that is where deep perception transforms from survival mechanism into strength. Because true awareness is not restless. It is steady. This may be the hardest truth of all. Not everyone wants to see. When your awareness deepens, when you begin recognizing patterns beneath behavior and illusions beneath appearances, there is a natural urge to share it. You want to warn people. You want to help them avoid pain. You want to open their eyes to dynamics they are walking into blindly. At first, it feels compassionate, but slowly you discover something humbling. You cannot force awakening. You cannot drag someone into awareness. You cannot argue someone into maturity. Growth is not installed through debate. It is realized through readiness. Some people prefer comforting illusions, and that is their right. Illusions serve a psychological function. They protect identity, they soften anxiety, they create stability in uncertain circumstances. If someone is not prepared to dismantle that protection, they will defend it fiercely, not because they are foolish, but because they are afraid, and fear does not respond to logic, it responds to safety. You may present evidence, you may explain patterns, you may articulate your insight calmly and clearly. But if the truth threatens their self-image or security, they will resist it. They may dismiss you. They may accuse you of being negative. They may retreat further into denial. And here is where many perceptive individuals burn out. They mistake resistance for failure. They assume that if they just explain better, argue stronger, provide more examples, they can awaken the other person. So they push harder. They debate longer. They repeat themselves. But awakening is not persuasion, it is timing. If you try to wake everyone up, you will exhaust yourself. You will begin to feel resentful. You will start carrying frustration toward people who are simply not ready. You may even question your own clarity because of the constant opposition. This is where maturity is tested. Instead of trying to convert everyone to your perspective, you must shift your focus inward. Focus on becoming stable in your own clarity. Focus on embodying the insight rather than preaching it. Embodiment is quieter than persuasion, but far more powerful. The most transformative individuals in history were not constantly shouting their truth at every passerby. They lived it. They aligned their actions with their insight so consistently that others eventually felt the difference. Consistency creates credibility. When your life reflects your awareness, when your boundaries are healthy, when your reactions are measured, when your integrity is visible, people begin to notice. Not because you demanded attention, but because stability stands out in a chaotic world. Influence through embodiment is subtle. It does not coerce. It invites, and invitations are more powerful than arguments. There is also something liberating in accepting that not everyone will see what you see. It releases you from the burden of responsibility for other people's consciousness. It allows you to conserve energy. It prevents you from entangling your peace with someone else's denial. Your responsibility is not to make others see. Your responsibility is to remain balanced in what you see. That balance is crucial. Without it, awareness can become arrogance. You may begin to feel superior, frustrated, impatient with those who do not share your perception. But true clarity is humble. It remembers that you too once overlooked things. You too once resisted truths you were not ready for. Growth is layered. There were seasons in your life when you defended illusions because they were all you could handle at the time. There were conversations you dismissed that later made sense. There were lessons you could not absorb until pain made you receptive. Extend that same understanding to others. Compassion does not mean agreeing with illusions. It means recognizing readiness. When you release the need to awaken everyone, your energy stabilizes. You become less reactive when others disagree. You stop feeling personally offended by their denial. You allow space for their process without sacrificing your own clarity. And something interesting happens. The pressure disappears. You no longer feel compelled to correct every misunderstanding. You no longer feel obligated to prove your insight. You speak when necessary. You remain silent when appropriate. You choose your moments instead of chasing validation. That restraint is strength. Because the deeper truth is this: awakening cannot be forced, but it can be inspired. When someone observes your grounded presence, your measured responses, your refusal to engage in drama, they become curious. When they see that you are not easily manipulated, not easily shaken, not easily drawn into chaos, they start asking questions. And questions open doors more effectively than arguments. The danger of seeing what others don't is the temptation to carry everyone on your shoulders. To believe that because you see, you must fix. Because you understand, you must convince. But wisdom understands limits. You can illuminate a path. You cannot walk it for them. You can articulate a truth. You cannot force them to accept it. You can live consciously. You cannot control who follows. And when you accept that reality fully, a profound calm settles within you. You stop fighting reality. You stop resisting resistance. You stop exhausting yourself in battles that were never yours to win. You remain clear. You remain grounded. You remain steady. And in that steadiness, your awareness matures from insight into quiet strength. A strength that does not need to dominate, persuade, or prove. It simply is. And sometimes, that is more powerful than any argument you could ever make. Seeing what others don't is dangerous because it changes you first. It strips away naivete. It exposes uncomfortable layers of reality. It distances you from superficiality. But if you learn to carry it with humility, emotional discipline, and patience, it becomes strength. You stop reacting impulsively. You stop being easily manipulated. You stop living unconsciously. Yes, awareness can feel lonely. Yes, it can feel heavy. But it also gives you something rare: freedom from illusion. And once you have seen clearly, you cannot go back to sleep. The question is not whether you see differently. The question is whether you will carry that sight with wisdom or let it isolate and consume you. Because perception is power, but only when it is balanced by inner stability.